It's The Journey with drug and alcohol attorney Mark G. Astor.
All right, everybody. Welcome to another edition of The Journey Live. Super excited to have my good friend Udell Lynne here.
How you doing, Mark?
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Finally got you in here, right?
You finally got me in here.
I know.
Not from a lack of desire. Just we're.
Listen, you are in demand. So Jeffrey is a lawyer here in town. Works in a very unique area of really the treatment industry. Fellow martial artist and all around good guy. So I'm glad to have you in here.
Yeah, we could talk about martial arts all day long.
I know, but you know what? They hear me talking about that stuff all the time.
I gotta tell you, it's
probably for you. It's like me. It's my only place where I go. I can shut down.
It's a way of life. It really is, and I can't suggest it enough to people. Legitimate martial arts, not fly by night stuff, like real.
So we're going to talk about that, but I want to talk about what you do because you have a very unique practice. So maybe give us an idea of what you do, and then we can talk about how you got in there because that's a story in and of itself.
It really is. It's I represent. I have like a mixed practice. I'd say half my practice is doing land use and zoning. I'm a former city attorney and did zoning work for private practice. This is like land development and permitting and entitlements and how things get built. And the other probably half of my practice is what generally falls into health law. Health law is like an open book kind of conversation. It's all the laws. It's guiding clients through the minutia and the maze of licensing and doing things business regulation. And the almost exclusive focus, I don't deal with physicians, I don't deal with anything else, are substance use disorder treatment providers and their ancillary recovery residences, or what are generally colloquially called sober homes.
Right. So I know you're on the task force. In fact, the sober homes task force, which I think is how we might have met, right? Because I'd come one day, they'd asked me to come talk about.
Actually, we met through a common friend. That's where we were introduced first.
Is that what it was?
Yeah. There's Advanced Recovery Systems.
Okay.
And they said, you got to meet my friend Mark. He's phenomenal. I was really seriously, and we met, and again, we talked about, I think, was martial arts the whole time. Really,
apparently that's a lot more fun to talk about than practicing law.
Yeah. Well, because I've always wanted to get involved with like Krav Maga, so it was
all right.
Interesting.
We're gonna have to talk about that.
Yeah,
you just had to figure out how to monetize it. That's the really important thing. You don't want to be a broke martial artist.
Real martial artists don't make money. Our dojo is nonprofit, and we all run. Like anything else in the world, when you start monetizing it, all of a sudden you get a
can take some of the passion out of it. I know.
Yeah.
So how'd you get into this area of law? Because it's very unique. I think you're the only lawyer I've ever met who is niche down like that.
Yeah. Let me start at the end, because if we start at the beginning, we'll be here all day. Which, hey, it's fine. I'm a lawyer. We love talking. We say many lawyers are failed, entertainers. Something.
That's what I say.
Yeah, I could talk for forever. And when I was a prosecutor like yourself, I love that, because when you're in trial, you're basically you're
on stage.
You're on stage, and I used to win these awards when I was in high school for debate, doing impromptu speaking. So I was like geared up just to do that. But to get to the end, I've been practicing since '97. I went to University of Miami. Leapfrog ahead, in 2010, I had moved my practice. I had left a large law firm, Ackerman. It's like one of those type of large practice law firms, and opened my own practice, and had partnered up with an individual whose office was in Delray Beach, right downtown. What a great location, right on Atlantic Avenue. In my office, you look out, there's restaurants and everything. And I had some prior experience with sober living because I had worked for the city of Boca Raton. And Boca Raton I worked there from 2002 to 2005. And around that time...
So did you go from the state attorney's office to the city of Boca?
I went from city attorney's office, actually, I went from the University of Miami. I was a state prosecutor in Miami. So I guess let's go through that litany for a second. I was a state prosecutor.
You did the same thing I did, right?
Yeah. Well,
and then school to the state attorney's office.
And I interned throughout at the state attorney's office. And really, the reason that was is it's not so much I wanted to be a prosecutor. I grew up wanting to be a criminal defense attorney, not to represent criminals, but I was this libertarian streak that I was raised with. That like I read the Federalist Papers when I was a kid. I'm crazy like that, and come from a family of lawyers. I was raised that being a lawyer is a calling. It's a profession. It's not just an occupation. It really is. It's defense of the rule of law and the bedrock of our republic. And I'm serious. That's how I was raised, and so I was always told by my peers that, or University of Miami, look, if you really want to do that, go work for the state attorney's office because you're going to get way more trial experience. You're going to meet many more people. You're going to be exposed to many more types of cases. So I did that and found that office, at least, which is Kathy Rundle's office. She's still the state attorney for Dade County. Be a wonderful place, a place of fairness and justice and doing the right thing, that you didn't just represent one side, you represent all of the people.
You're there to do justice.
Yeah, and really that was their, and that was, and Kathy Rundle worked under Janet Reno, and who was the Attorney General, and really this sense of, wow, this is really an amazing place, because not only can I do justice, but I can do justice by everybody, and I earned a lot of respect from judges and criminal defense attorneys because I was fair. I looked at the case and said, like, this isn't fair, this isn't right, I don't have the evidence or whatever, and I ultimately worked up to work in the economic crimes unit, because I was getting cases. Most prosecutors hated these like paper cases, and I loved them. I found them fascinating because you had to actually work. You know what I mean? And you got to develop the case from investigation through prosecution. So I found them fascinating.
That's right.
And at the same time, don't forget, that was by '99. I know today, of course, email, internet's like second nature. It's built into our the chips.
I know when I was prosecutor, we
had nothing. Right.
We had intranet, but we didn't have internet.
Right. Exactly. No. And in fact, we didn't. Only limited people had intranet.
And that was 3 years after. That was in 3 years in. So
yeah. And so, one of the early kind of cases I were getting were like credit card frauds, where people were skimming credit cards, and we were getting cases that the FBI and Secret Service it was too small for them.
They didn't want to touch it.
Well, it wasn't worth it financially for them. It would cost them more to prosecute it than the crime and whatever. So they turned it over to the state. But my witnesses and the evidence were developed by federal agents. So I had these amazing cases and found them great and fascinating, and got to know FBI agents and other people, and found their professionalism to be wonderful. And again, reinforcing more that I really like being there. But yeah, put myself through law school. I had student loans. It was one of those things. And I was getting married. My wife, I was born and raised in Miami. My parents were born and raised in Miami. My wife was from Miami. And we're like, are we going to stay in Miami? So we had this kind of conversation. I said to my wife, my fiance at the time, look, I'm on the cusp of this new computer crime. Would be called cybercrime today or whatever. I really want to get involved with this. And so the statewide prosecutor and I were talking because they were opening a new computer crime division out of Orlando. And my wife didn't want to move to Orlando, and I don't know if I wanted to move to Orlando, but we're like, so let's do this. I said, we'll move temporarily. Let's move up the state a little bit to Boca Raton. It's kind of like, between Miami and, Orlando in our minds. Anything outside of Miami was Orlando. Let's check it out for a while. So I went from the state attorney's office to a small local firm here, just did commercial litigation, which I hated. It's because, you go from like this honor system, being a prosecutor in the court, and everyone, you had this honor between defense attorneys and prosecutors and judges. It was, which if that's your first job out of law school, like that's exactly what law.
And you have autonomy. I know when I was I was the same thing. I was a certified legal intern.
Yep.
They hired me the month before I popped out of law school, and you really get to develop your own sort of skill set without having somebody micromanage you. Right. You don't have to worry about billing.
That's right.
You just have to do your job, right?
Yeah, and I was taught early on, it takes a lifetime to build a reputation and a second to lose it.
Yep.
So I was very keen about that, and my reputation was an ethical, honest, straight shooter, did a great job, worked hard, but didn't lose my focus, on who I was representing, meaning I know I represented the state, but if someone would, I also had to look at law enforcement and say, hey, what are they doing? Did they get the evidence right? Are they kind of...
That's not easy too, because sometimes, especially when you're a young prosecutor and you got law enforcement officers telling you he did it right and he had probable cause, and you're like, no, he didn't.
Plus, a lot of prosecutors became buddies with some police departments, and I just felt that was too close. I needed to keep arm's distance from that. Be nice to people, and there's some detectives that I came to trust and know, but there's some I'm like, like some certain cities where they just don't have the resources to do good work. But be that what it may. You go from there to civil litigation, which simply over fighting about money. It just wasn't. It was a harsh wake up call, and it wasn't what I wanted. And then speaking to someone, it was serendipitous. Someone said, "Hey, look, I was over at the city looking for a job, and I noticed that they're looking for a police legal advisor. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. What is that? And I looked at it. It's basically working with a police department as their attorney inside. And I'm like, oh, that's right up my alley. I applied. I got the job over here at City of Boca Raton. And that.
So were you the Boca PD lawyer? Is that basically what you were?
Yes and no. Because yes, that's what I was hired for. And then when I go over there, it turns out the city attorney decided to consolidate any city attorney that was there. She was relatively new to that position, but not new to being a city attorney. She's a phenomenal attorney, by the way. I mean, she's a jack of all trades, master of all, really. But her passion's being a municipal attorney. She could work anywhere if she wanted to, in my opinion. So I fell into her office instead of being with the PD. Though I was assigned the police department as my focus, I was now thrown into municipal law. I'm like, well, I didn't even know what that was. Okay, well, I got this job. I'm along for the ride, and that's what my first exposure to zoning was. Because so much of what a city does is, especially in Boca Raton or in South Florida, interfacing with land development, as opposed to other states. Florida, you develop, especially South Florida, people are developing land here and buying houses and doing things. So,
sorry, just close it, Jay. Just push it down. Sorry. Go ahead.
So, what happened from there is, and through my exposure there and working there and learning things, we had this case that ultimately the federal case became known as Jeffrey O. versus City of Boca Raton. And that was a case about a treatment provider in Boca Raton that was using an apartment building for sober living. And when his residents would relapse, that was the rule. You can't pee dirty. It was right over on Camino. So it's in a neighborhood. He would kick them out. Here's your black garbage bag with all your stuff. Have a nice day. Well, you can imagine those people are then walking the neighborhood. They've come from all over the country. They didn't know where to go. There's not a bus station nearby. There's not a plane, an airport.
So how long ago was that? Because, I mean, I know the laws have changed, and we'll talk about some of the
and that was a seminal case. That was early 2000s.
So basically you had a guy who had a place, and he said, okay, I'm going to call it a sober home. Come on down.
Yeah.
That's what he did.
I actually don't know how he structured it because he did have a treatment center. So I don't know if he said, come live in my sober home and go to my treatment center or vice versa. I wasn't aware of any of that. All I knew is that he had an apartment building that was adjacent to a single family neighborhood. And these people were, the neighbors were calling the cops. Hey, I got this guy sleeping in my backyard with a garbage bag. What the heck's going on? And after repeated complaints, we figured out, or the police department figured out what was happening. And they used municipal code enforcement to try to shut him down. And there was ultimately a federal lawsuit that was filed by him, joined by the ACLU, and ultimately joined by the U.S. Attorney's Office against the city.
Well, that's a big lawsuit.
Yeah, and it had to do with fair housing and ADA. And my inclination, having no exposure to anything, like when I heard the word sober house, I thought it was a place you go after drinking all night and you needed to dry up because you didn't want to drive home. It's like, hey, is there a place I can...
Not a bad idea, actually.
Yeah, right. It's like, hey, just wake me up at 10 o'clock and I'll take a shower instead of driving. Right. It's like, that's what I thought it was. I really had no idea. My ignorance level, because if you're not involved, if you're not in recovery or have someone in a family
you don't know
member,
about this
you have
stuff.
no idea. But you know that it's a place that's housing addicts. And that strikes fear because the only vision we have of the word addict is someone who's shooting up, robbing people, and being bad. You see it in movies. You don't have any exposure to it, and we don't want to see it. It's one of those things in society. We don't want to see our sick and elderly infirm, put them over there.
Yeah, it goes to do with the whole stigma thing, which I know that...
Absolutely. It was all stigma, and I'll tell you, I got a master's level education from being involved with that case. Now, I was not directly involved with the case. There was outside counsel that handled it for the city, but I was doing like ancillary supplementary work, and I was interested. I was reading the pleadings and learned so much about the Fair Housing Act and its history. Learned so much about the American Disabilities Act, which was adopted in 1990, and its history and how it applied to housing. And it was a wake-up call. It was about the history and what people need. But addiction treatment itself was in its infancy. Addiction treatment, as we know it today, really probably came out of the Hazleton Center in Minnesota.
So how long did you end up spending? Did you end up working for the city?
I was there for 3 years also.
Okay.
And actually, that case that became known as Jeffrey O. And the reason it's O is because he proceeded anonymously because he has the right to his anonymity. Well, the multiple plaintiffs, but that's the lead plaintiff. That case was ultimately decided in 2007.
Wow, that's a hell of a long time.
Yeah, well, it started in the mid-2000s, but it's like maybe 5 years of litigation. And really, it ended with the court down here saying to the city, you're acting discriminatorily. The ordinances you've adopted are discriminatory, because they were straight up saying, hey, you can have a hospital here. Oh, but if you're treating people with addictions, you can't be here. And housing, sorry, you can't do that. And all this evidence was introduced that cohabitation was necessary for to ameliorate, addiction and to help people on their recovery journey. Again, this is stuff I learned from federal court and learned from experts that were testifying. And then there was like a little period from, I left there and went to Ackerman from 2005 to 2010. And I was doing, that's really during the boom, the economic boom and the recession. I was squeezed in between the best of times and the worst of times. And I had some clients, people who were looking to do drug treatment centers. As a zoning matter, someone would refer it to me trying to get work. And I found it very difficult to even get zoning done. And they didn't want to pay the fees that Ackerman was making me, hourly fee to make me pay. But I was interested and knew enough about it. I left Ackerman in 2010 and moved my office to Delray. And Delray, I had also quickly learned, was the recovery capital of the United States. It's not, but that's the moniker.
That was certainly the
right. Well,
it looked like,
and the West Coast was called the Rehab Riviera. I mean, you have these names, Miami's the Magic City. It had this name. And I got to tell you, Mark, what struck me was this absolute sense of community. First of all, that Delray Beach has. And being born in Miami, you really, or South Florida, you never really have that sense of community here. I'm like 47 years old. I was born in 71. So I'm telling you, from the time I was born growing up, there was no sense of community anywhere, because South Florida is inherently a transient place. Very. People are moving here all the time, and people are like, oh, people are moving here now. No, they've been moving here before I was born. My family ultimately had come from New York, like 3 generations ago. So people are always coming to South Florida, now more than ever, but there were certainly big waves of people. So there was never a sense of community, because you have someone from New York, New Jersey, Ohio, whatever, coming all over and living in a gated community, and that was it. But Delray Beach was different, and I didn't understand why. And I thought it was just this cool, funky town that just had this really neat sense of community about it. But what I learned quickly was the reason Delray Beach had that sense of community is because it had a 40-plus year recovery community living amongst the masses. They weren't walking around with scarlet letters saying, hey, I'm in recovery. But there's something there called the Crossroads Club, you may be aware of, which is a meeting center that has meetings practically 24 hours a day for AA meetings, NA meetings, you name it, they have it. And the sense of community came about because there's a saying you may have heard, it's old, it's colloquial, cliche, but friends are the family that you choose for yourself. And these people that were coming to Delray for sober living, to be in sobriety, were choosing their peers to be part of their family, their support system. And when I saw that, and when I saw that they would embrace anybody, you don't have to be in recovery to be embraced in that family. You could feel it. It's palatable.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons I enjoy doing what I do. In fact, Audrey and I actually stopped going to all the bar functions. Yeah. And we spend, any networking we do or social stuff is really within the treatment industry. We've made a lot of good friends. Yeah. And I think
really good people. And
most of them who are in recovery have experienced some level of personal growth, and that
absolutely,
I think that really changes the dynamics. We enjoy doing those things. I mean, we've made a lot of good friends. I try to sponsor events.
There's no ego there. You meet these people, their egos.
They've had that ego.
They've smashed and hit bottom, and I would say I would happily move to a known, recognized recovery community and move there because of that sense of taking care of each other. We joke down here, the only time a community takes care of each other is when you have a hurricane and you got to roll your barbecue out to the streets so everyone can eat. Yeah, right? And then you don't talk to each other again. That's not a joke. People will say that down here. You ask anyone, hey, when's the last time you really got together with your neighborhood? Oh, well, there's a hurricane, right? That's a natural disaster. Recovery communities like that 24/7. So when people started coming to me in Delray as a zoning lawyer, hey, look, the city's cracking down on my sober home. And that's what Delray was doing. You had this faction in Delray that was tired of being called a recovery community. Probably because it's also a vacation destination location. And there was this, I think what really was the straw that broke the camel's back, what was actually a wonderful story written in the New York Times in 2007. It was on the front page. Great story. I have it till this day. The headline was something like, in a small funky town, people find an oasis of sobriety. And the story was lauding everything we just talked about. This great little town where you can go, there were sober coffee houses where people would have meetings, and sober events, and sober this and sober that. It was a phenomenal story. And I think that for people that were the elected officials at the time, some of whom were my friends and I respect and still respect. Some I kind of lost respect for things that they said and did. They saw that. Some saw that as, our ugly secrets out of the closet, and some saw that as, oh my God, this, we're heavily dependent upon tourism and our beach and our property values, and now you just put on the front page of the New York Times,
We're
city
full of addicts.
City full of addicts, and they freaked out. And that really, coincidentally, I wasn't aware of that 2007 story at the time, but how funny is that that's the same year that the Jeffrey O case was decided. So as the city of Delray is starting to crack down on sober living illegally, the Jeffrey O case came out.
Federal courts are saying,
yeah, you're right. So someone didn't get the message, you know what I mean? Someone didn't talk, or the timing was weird. And I'm hearing this and I'm learning more, and I'm going, I was on the board of the Chamber of Commerce in Delray, and I was starting to get the message out. I'm like, guys, listen, everyone needs to calm down. One, there's this federal case, and you're going down the same path. You're going to lose and lose badly. You're going to get sued, and you're going to lose a lot of money in legal fees. You're going to lose a lot of money in damages. It's going to be a pockmark on your city, because forever the Department of Justice now, kind of like voting rights cases, is going to look at you forever now, everything that you do.
And if you don't like the light shone on you now, wait till the federal lawsuit comes down the pipe.
Absolutely.
They're really going to start shining
light. Well, it actually
got
worse than that, okay, because, and at the same time, I started taking on this heartfelt thing, because what I came to learn then was that the sober living that was there and is still there. There's an amazing organization called SCRA, the South County Recovery Residents Association, SCRRA. Been there forever. And the Lodge is one of these old sober living places. There's the Beachcomber, which is treatment on the beach. It's just been there for 40-something years. They were kind of getting the black eye a little bit. So now two things are now happening in Delray at the same exact time. One, I had worked with it was called Caron Renaissance, with the Caron Foundation. They wanted to develop what they call the Ocean Drive program, which is higher end,
more executive type,
executive treatment. For the people that are of means and want more
privacy.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
foo-foo.
Yeah, I mean, listen. There's a side note. There's a split of opinion on that. Is that if you continue to allow yourself to live in that high area,
never get any better.
You're not hitting bottom. You got to realize you put your pants on just like me. And so there's a division of argument that, and I'm not a clinician, but so be that what it may. When talk about the spotlight, that's what you said. Oh, you want to put a spotlight. Well, when that happened, the city really came down hard on Caron. They were buying houses on the beach, and if you know Delray Beach, the beachfront property owners are much more vocal and vigilant.
They're protecting their little area of the world.
Ironically, a lot of people, though, I don't know percentage, don't really live there year round. They're people from other parts of the country that want to live on the beach, and it's not like their home. It's their home. It's their second home. It's their vacation home. But still, NIMBY, not in my backyard. There's stigma. I don't want this addict next to me. They're going to rape my children. They're going to rob my house. They're going to walk the streets. Everything they've ever seen in all the movies. And so if you didn't want a spotlight before, now they create a spotlight by calling the news. The neighbors called the news. And there's your spotlight. Instead of when a lawsuit was ultimately filed, it was Caron Foundation of Florida versus City of Delray Beach. And again, I was involved with that litigation. I wasn't lead counsel. We're blessed. There was a phenomenal attorney in South Florida named James Green. He's in West Palm Beach. Old school civil rights attorney, does work with the ACLU and has his own practice. he was the one who worked, and I met him on the Jeffrey O case on the other side. So we called Jim, and Karen Foundation got together with Jim, and there's this litigation, and I told the city, look, you got to resolve this quickly because this is not going to end well for you. And I'm not threatening you, I'm just telling you based upon my experience, this isn't going to end well for you. But no, the city felt bolstered and supported by their Beach Property Owners Association. We have to do something about it. And then the mayor, then the planning and zoning chairman, but then mayor, had made some really disparaging remarks about the recovery community, which only played into the hands of us because you're you know, it really was shocking what was being said, and I felt that the recovery community, and at that point, really also the treatment community was getting a bad rap, because that was really that was 2011, 2012, and that was my first real introduction to then the treatment community, because I knew about sober living, but I didn't know the relationship between treatment and housing directly. I mean, I knew of it, but I didn't know necessarily the nexus between the two. And I came to learn about what we call the Florida model of treatment, which is treatment at one location and then you live transitional housing somewhere else. Of course, Karen Foundation won. They settled with the city quickly. Well, the city settled with Karen quickly. Had to pay a lot of fees. And I got to tell you, Mark, it was a good day and a bad day for me. It was a good day because the right people won for the right reasons. It was bad because it's not like the city said, like I had that epiphany working on the Jeffrey O case. Oh, I get it now. I see, I understand. The city felt that the legs were cut from underneath them.
They got the short end of the stick.
Well, what are we going to do? Oh, these addicts are going to overtake our city. No. So the reason that was a bad day for me was because I was, to some degree, discriminated against by my peers now. Oh, you represent those people, and you work with them. I was like, wait a second. And I got to tell you, I had like flashbacks, though I'm not born in the 60s, I had flashbacks to being a civil rights lawyer in the 60s representing, say,
representing a minority.
Or like voting rights act cases, or saying, oh, you work with black people, so we're not going to work with you. I was like, whoa, what are you? It's 2012, people. Like, this isn't 1962, and it was shocking to me. It was really shocking to me, especially living in South Florida. We're not living in like upstate Idaho or something.
It's a real melting pot down here.
Absolutely. Like I said, being brought up in Miami, we had the Mariel boat lift. There were a lot of Cubans, and we welcomed them in. Hey, well, please, as long as you're here, it's a melt. South Florida, I think, is the United States when it comes to the melting pot and internationalism and people living of all different cultures and religions and types. So I was brought up with that, but people in Delray were not. People had moved there and said, wait a second, this is my house, this is my neighborhood. A lot of NIMBY cracked right in. So I found myself being lumped in with those people. And I say those people, I didn't mind saying I work with the recovery industry. It's great. But, Jeff must be an addict too. I was like, whoa, hold on a second. Like, I didn't mind it, but it's like, a lot of misinformation, and at that point, there was internet. Remember, we were saying there wasn't. Then there was internet, and there was Facebook, and there was email, and so a lot of rumors are going on about me and my family and my integrity. About who do you work for? And I was beside myself.
So that's kind of ironic because, we've had the task force here, and I'm going to move on a little bit, Jeff.
Yeah.
So. We're in now year 3 of the Sober Homes Task Force, and you've been on the task force since the beginning. So,
actually, before we'll talk about that, I was on the task force, but I've been involved with legislation to fix the abuses before then.
So I think that's ironic because here you are, you've sort of been shunned, or by the legal profession.
Yeah.
We get into that. That's a whole other conversation, which is maybe why I don't go to any more of the bar functions. But here they are, sort of shunning you, and meanwhile. When I met you, I mean, basically, my impression was, hey, this is a guy who's obviously clearly well respected for the work that he does, or he wouldn't be on the task force. Right. So I think that's an interesting, it's sort of, and I know anytime I've come up there, because Al asked me to come up, I mean, you're certainly an active participant in the task force, especially when it comes to the legislation issue.
Yeah, well, one of the reasons that I was asked Actually, I don't know why I was asked, and no one said, fill out this application. I was approached, and that had to do with when. And let me digress just a little bit because the Delray story does link directly into the task force. Is that what we learned though in defending the recovery community? Is what we learned quickly, and I became very close with the city attorney at the time, and trying to work collaboratively with them. Because the city attorney is also very open-minded and progressive, and said, "Look, I have to represent my client, but yeah, we can't be. I can't continually expose my client to lawsuits." Was what everyone now acknowledges to be the perfect storm for South Florida. You had, and this does go into what State Attorney Dave Ehrenberg's involvement. Dave, for people who don't know Dave's also a South Florida native, from North Miami, and so we never knew each other, but we shared South Florida, stomping grounds. When you grow up in South Florida, there's only so many areas you can go to. Like everyone went to the Aventura Mall. That's the only place to go if you know what I'm talking about. So you can share stories that way. But Dave went to Harvard and Harvard Law School and was the youngest state senator in the state's history and was very active with things. And then worked as an assistant attorney general under, I think, Pam.
Yeah, he worked for Pam Bondi. He was her drug czar, basically.
And his drug czar, and because we were having the pill mill epidemic. And I joke, you take a fraud, Florida will make it fraudier. It's that company, BASF. You make the plane and we make it fly faster. Well, you take a fraud and Florida makes it
bigger and better
on steroids every single time, right? Every time. So you had the pill mill problem where you had the dispensing or over dispensing of opioids, and that goes. We're not going to get into the history of that, but in short, it was the whole concept of pain management.
The George Brothers and
yes, on the criminal side, it was that, but on the medical side, it was the concept that, again, we could spend a whole nother conversation about why that happened, but the concept of we want to have patients mitigate their pain so they can focus on their medical recovery from a broken leg or surgery or whatever. Keep pain down, the patient will recover better, and so. Right. The Sackler family and Purdue Pharma came out with OxyContin. No, this is great. Give you a pill. I don't have to put you on a morphine drip. And that went from there. People quickly realized, I love these drugs. These feel great. Or someone was put on medication and they couldn't get off of it because a doctor would prescribe it and not say, very rarely because of the stigma and whatever, a patient wouldn't come forward and say, Doctor Astor, I can't stop this. So I'm still on pain, and doctors would keep prescribing, and doctors would probably say, look, hey, you're coming every 30 days, here you go. And there weren't guidelines on the prescription as we have today. So you had the pill mills, and that's what Dave Ehrenberg was involved with, shutting down the pill mills. There's videos of things that they did undercover that are shocking of what people would do. Cash businesses, check cashing. It was like legal drug dealing stores. It was unbelievable. And they knew when you shut that down, you can't stop the addiction. So,
and the pills are already out there.
Pills are out there, and even once you get rid of the pills, smart drug dealers, not the street guys, but guys realize, guess what? We got to replace this. So heroin, jumped right into the scene, and you had this heroin thing that ticked off and was crazy.
A lot cheaper than the
Yeah, and we're not even going to get to the overdoses from fentanyl or carfentanil, and those, carfentanil is an elephant tranquilizer. It's amazing that even happened. But so now we go back to addiction, and it's always been stigmatized. It's always been those people, and even people that had someone in their family as an alcoholic. It was always like the person the brother, son, whoever that you hid away, or was a drunkie or whatever you want to call it, and there wasn't really. You go to a doctor. You can't go to your primary care physician and say, hey, I have an addiction. Can you help me? Doctors don't know anything about this then and still today. And that's why, 60 years ago, 50 years ago, that's kind of how Alcoholics Anonymous started. They figured out on their own a way through a faith-based higher power to be abstinence-based, coupled with the need to live with other people of the same thinking, which is no different than if people were kept a kosher household or were Muslim and want to keep a certain household, or people, let's say, were LGBTQ and wanted to live together. Whatever reason you want to live together, people that
it's a support system for you.
Absolutely, whatever support system, people have shared values, and so sober living's been involved hundreds of years. Actually, the NAR, the National Affiliation of Recovery Residences, has detailed how far back the concept of sober living went. So sober living went hand in hand with AA, NA, and those fellowships. What happened, and this is how I get to the task force, this is how we get there, is what happened in Delray was because Delray had a long-established recovery community. people were coming to Delray for sobriety. They didn't know what treatment was. How do you find treatment? That's part of what the task force started picking up on the marketing side of it. How do you find treatment?
Well, it used to be come to Florida and, sit on the beach and get clean.
But where do you go? You knew you went to Delray Beach if you're on the East Coast, or you went to somewhere in California if you're west of the Mississippi. That was just known. And there's certain names of companies like Betty Ford or whatever. You just knew those names. But what would most people do, Mark, is they would Google my son, my loved one. It's always a parent. Very rarely is
Well, that's who our clients are, parents.
Absolutely.
From all over the country. Most of them are not from Florida.
No, I think
the kids are here, but the parents aren't.
I'm going to make up a number, but I would say 85 to 90%, if not more, of the consumer, the selection of the good, of the service, is a loved one. It's not the person who's suffering.
Right.
Very rarely is the person who says, hey, I have a problem. I got to get help. And maybe that happens after they get arrested for a DUI or something, their third or fourth. Very rarely after the first. So what do people do is they go on Google. I need drug alcohol treatment. And what pops up? Sober homes in Delray Beach, because please come to Florida, live with us, and be here. So what are the rules to live in sober living, Mark? We talked about the Jeffrey O case. What's the key rule to be in sober living?
Staying sober, I would imagine.
Which means, how do you prove that? Urinalysis testing. So quickly, people said, okay, I have the urine test. I wonder if their insurance will pay for it. Lo and behold, their insurance will pay for it. Why would their insurance pay for it? Because the second part of this triumvirate is the Affordable Care Act of 2010, and just before that, the Parity Act, the Mental Health Equity and Addiction Parity Act of 2008, which said you have to provide drug alcohol treatment, and it has to be on par with medical care. And so you had these robust insurance benefits, and people were billing out for urine testing, and the payments that were coming back were like, you hear wild stories.
And I guess obviously the insurance companies hadn't picked up on...
No.
They hadn't picked up on what was really about to happen.
Absolutely. So they're paying out $1,500 for a 15-panel urinalysis screening. I mean, I'm testing you for everything. Why? Because I don't know what you're doing during the day, so I'm not going to just test you for whatever you're on. I want to make sure you didn't pick up a new drug, so I'm testing you for everything. It's like, wow, $1,500. I'm going to test you.
Not bad for making somebody pee in a cup.
Yeah, I'm going to test you 3 times a week. Wow, I'm getting $4,500. So I have 6 people in my house. You do the math. Well, let me see if insurance will pay for 5 times a week. Wow, they will. Let me see if they'll pay for 6 times a week. So, everyone out there watching, you do the math. $1,500 per resident. Let's say there's 6 residents, sometimes 8. It's millions of dollars. Quickly, insurance got a hold of this. So, whoa, what's going on here? And determined that there's no medical necessity to test urinalysis in sober living. Now, I disagree with that, because I think sober living is clearly a necessary. It's part of the yin and yang of treatment. I disagree that you need to be urinalysis tested 5 times a week, and there were no standards as to the appropriate number of times. So they shut that down. So what happened next? People figured out, okay, so I need medical necessity. What does that mean? Oh, you can only test in a drug treatment center. So what popped up? IOP, intensive outpatient. These little clinics that pop up. And why do they pop up all over? Because Florida has a very low bar to opening a drug treatment center. Very low. Anyone can open a drug treatment center. The only qualifications you need to own one...
Can't be a convicted felon, right?
Right. And if you are a convicted felon...
Get somebody else to be your CEO.
Get someone else to be your CEO. It's amazing how many people's wives all of a sudden start opening drug treatment centers. That was amazing. It must be their second job. Honey, I'm going to go to work. You open a drug treatment center. No, that wasn't what was happening. So between that and then 2008 in the middle, we hit the recession. Housing prices dropped. So people who realize I need more space, I need more warehousing for my commodity, were buying up more and more and more sober living. So when you took Delray Beach, which is a city that was already antagonistic to sober living, and then they were seeing the opening of these flop houses. They weren't sober living. They weren't true recovery residences the way that they were and always were. It was an absolute bastardization and abuse of it. That was the perfect storm.
Do you think that was where the whole term Florida Shuffle came from?
That's where it started. The Florida Shuffle then came from where you're in my treatment center. I go through your insurance benefits. Insurance isn't paying for you anymore.
So
I kick you out. I kick you out. This is the Florida Shuffle. I kick you out. You're done. So what do? You either get high on your own, or a patient broker gets you high so you can get replaced, and your insurance benefits start all over again. So the Florida Shuffle is being shuffled from treatment center to treatment center to treatment center to treatment center in a series of relapse, where relapse was the economic engine driving the machine and not recovery.
So let's maybe talk about a little bit about the whole patient brokering thing, because just from what I saw, it seemed like you had the treatment centers. Some of the bad actors were in cahoots with some of the sober home owners.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about how that dynamic worked, because I mean that the term gets gets thrown around a lot.
Yeah.
But let's maybe talk about how, from a legal perspective, and what one of the things that Dave and Al and the Tussles did was start to arrest some of those people who were clearly incentivizing people to relapse.
Well, we started to figure out, and I learned this from my clients. Again, overwhelming number of my clients, I figured out, were treatment centers that had their own sober living. And the reason they had their own sober living is because by that point they couldn't trust any sober living. They didn't know who was where was what, so they wanted to have their own housing where they could house their own residents, and that's really how I got really involved in the industry, because I was helping my clients with their housing, and at the same time that my clients were saying, can we do this, can we do this, can we do this, can we do that, how can we run our business, are we allowed to do certain things? Because this is an industry, it's amazing, that had no guidance, no lawyers, no compliance directors like hospitals have. It was all word of mouth. And no matter what anyone said, they said, well, Mark's doing it, and Mark's fine, so it must be okay. I mean, this really was people learning from the street. It'd be like if you lived in East LA, in Compton, and everyone's walking around with a gun, hanging out their pants.
Must be okay.
It must be okay. That's how you do things. And that continued to be the problem. So the issue of patient brokering early on became an issue. I wasn't even aware that it was happening. And what was happening, it took on various forms. I was aware it was happening probably around 2012 when clients would come to me and say, Jeff, we went to our sober living residence to pick up our clients for the day, and they're all gone. What do we do? I would call the police. What we ultimately learned what happened was that all those patients were induced, incentivized, were given things to go to another sober living residence. And the only rule was you can live here for free, you can do whatever you want, so long as you go to our treatment center. That's patient brokering. And we learned that, again, as a criminal prosecutor back in the late 90s, you know what the law was, especially prosecuting frauds in the economic crimes unit. Chapter 817 is all the frauds. You read all the different crimes, and that was one of them. Patient brokering really came out of the statute, came out of staged car accidents. Paying runners, personal injury. Hey, go to this chiropractor. Hey, thanks for the kickback, and lawyers were part of that. So to get to patient brokering here, it took on different forms. The crux of patient brokering is you can't pay someone for a referral. You can't induce someone through giving them something to go to your treatment center. And there's a public policy reason behind that. We want patients choosing a healthcare provider based upon the bona fides, the reputation of that doctor.
Not because they brought them down or on a flight and...
Absolutely, because one, in some fields it causes overutilization. With addiction treatment, you have a vulnerable population, both with the person in recovery, the addict, we'll call them. I don't like using the term, but just the person that has the addiction, and their loved one who knows nothing about treatment and is in an emergency state of mind. It's not like you have cancer, can maybe get a second opinion or surgery. You have this existential crisis. You got to get your loved one into treatment, and you make a quick decision. And you're relying upon the salesperson on the other side of the phone. Say, okay, we'll fly him down. Okay, great. As a parent, like, that's great. That's wonderful. You don't know that's patient brokering. You are making your decision because this treatment center is flying your child down and maybe giving them free housing to do all this. And as a parent, at that
you're desperate to save your kid. You'll do anything.
Yeah, you don't even know that's illegal. You're like, great, thank you. That's amazing. God bless America and the Affordable Care Act. So what was happening early on was, as we talked about, people were really bad actors, unscrupulous people, were utilizing sober living to attract people to live there to get access to their urine for testing. When that got shut down, they then opened the treatment centers, and they then needed to do urinalysis testing. And then they realized, well, I need to control my resources, like cattle. I need, if I'm a milk farmer, I need to have that's what it was. It was really, that's the perfect analogy.
You were milking the insurance.
You're milking the patient, literally, not over literally like a cow, but I mean, next best thing. And the problem is that you have today, the demographic of your average patient is going to be 27 years old tops, male or female. we say, if 40 is the new 30, 50 is the new 40. Well, if these kids are in their 20s, they're like teenagers up here. And particularly if they're using an opioid or any drug, the second they started abusing substances, it kind of, besides the dopamine effect, it stunts their emotional growth. So they're still thinking like an 18 or 19-year-old child. Not like my grandfather. Which is why
the parents have such. They say, "Why doesn't my kid decide? Why are they thinking so irrationally?" Well,
or my kid, I can't deal with my kid anymore. We've tried everything, and it's tough love. Or I'm done with you. Just go. I have insurance here. Take and the Affordable Care Act also extended insurance benefits for beneficiaries to 26 years old, I think. So you have a lot of kids on their parents' insurance, which we then joked they came to Delray Beach, we call it club rehab. They just had to hang out, sit in a meeting, talk about their family, not really do anything. They weren't pushed to do anything.
And the treatment center got paid.
Because they had insurance. They had the American Express card that said Blue Cross Blue Shield on it. And that's where it came from. But because insurance wouldn't pay for housing, and the patients quickly realized that they were a commodity. So they started prostituting themselves out, sometimes literally. But euphemistically, they realized that they had value. So they would go to treatment centers and say, what are you going to give to me to go to your treatment center? And treatment centers now are popping up all over the place, trying to compete for the same patient. They started offering inducements and incentives to patients. You can get free rent. You can live with your girlfriend, your boyfriend. You can even do drugs. We don't care. It was horrible. And the whole time, certainly people like myself starting in, I would say 2011 or 2012, and city attorney of Delray Beach, even the mayor of Delray Beach, at that time, FAR, the Florida Association of Recovery Residences with John Lehman, other people that were established recovery providers, were going to Dave Ehrenberg's office, we're going to the Attorney General's office, we're going to the police department, the division of...
We need help.
Going to DCF, Department of Children and Families, the regulator, we need help, what the heck's going on here? And we weren't getting any help. Not because they didn't want to, but it was... One, they clearly didn't understand the industry, and why would they? What experience do they have in this entire paradigm that's unknown and unusual and very unique? And so, ultimately, we'll talk. That's how the task force ultimately started. I was involved earlier on working with Delray Beach and their lobbyists on crafting laws to make sure that sober living residences had to be certified, because I want to say 2011, it could be 2010, the National Affiliation of Recovery Residences was formed. Each state had the equivalent of FAR, the Florida Association of Recovery Residences. Georgia's had it, GAR, for like 40 years. California's had it forever. Their states have had it for a long time. They formed an umbrella organization, and FAR was created. And so we were pushing to have these nationalized standards to distinguish between a flop house and a recovery residence. And to say, if you want to be a sober living residence in Florida, you need to be certified.
All right, so look, let's just talk about two things just to sort of wrap up. Where we are now, because the task force is now going into year, is it 3 or 4?
3.
We're
in our third year.
Okay, where we are now, and maybe where we see things going in the upcoming years. I don't know how long the task force is going to keep running for.
I think for a while. One of the first tasks of the task force was to identify the problem. And they were given a grant of money from the state to do that. That's how the task force was created. And in that allocation of money, in an appropriations bill, they said you have to put these kinds of professionals, people from the industry, and I had given and had been giving lectures for years on what patient brokering is, how to identify it, how to stay away from it, how to not let your patients patient broker themselves, and what you can and can't do. And at one of those meetings, some representatives from the state attorney's office were there and saw my presentation. That was in May of 2016. When I met them. And I'd already been working with the city on years prior, and Representative Bill Hager at the time and Senator Jeff Clemens on legislation to force this to happen. Because we were identifying the patient brokering issue. So the first task of the task force was they impaneled Dave's office. We call him Dave. Everyone calls him Dave. He's Mr. Ehrenberg, but he says, please call me Dave. So we know him locally as Dave, right? I mean, that's the way he is.
Dave.
It's Dave. I would never call Kathy Rundle Kathy, it's Ms. Rundle, but that's Dave. They impaneled the county grand jury, and I was asked to testify before that on what I knew about patient brokering and whatnot and marketing fraud. So the grand jury report came out, and we started to develop laws at that time regarding the voluntary certification of recovery residences. And while the Patient Brokering Act had existed for a long time, we increased the penalties for patient brokering. Some people say, "Oh, the Patient Brokering Act changed." It didn't change. It's always been the same. The prohibitions had always been the same. By that time, we increased the penalties. Then last year, and then this is the progress. Now, up until this year's changing a little bit different. But up until this point, it really was focusing on patient brokering and what DCF needed to do to tighten its reins. We couldn't force them to get an allocation of money, but there's certain things we could do regarding licensing and other things to start to tighten it up, so that everyone's spouse couldn't become an owner of a treatment center. And so last year we did a lot of good work, but the bill that we put together last year didn't get heard in the Florida legislature. It's a 60-day session. It's fast, and it didn't get heard, unfortunately, because of the shooting at Stoneman Douglas High School. When that happened in February 14th of 2017. That took over the last 2 to 3 weeks of the legislative session. So our bill, as they say, died on the floor. It just didn't get heard. So this year we took up the same bill, and on things that we learned, we started tweaking it more and more. And the bill this year, House Bill 369, is currently on the floor of the House right now. I haven't checked online its update. I'm sure it's going to pass. And there's sister bills that are following in the Senate. They're going to probably make sure those two mirror each other because they have to, and then it'll likely go to the governor's desk for signature, and that does a lot this year. We don't have enough time to go into what it does, but it really further focuses in on the issues and does some good things too. It really encourages the workforce. We found out that a lot of people, one of the biggest things is we found out a lot of people were being excluded from working in the drug treatment industry who otherwise could and should because of a criminal record.
I remember we talked about that one
client.
I mean,
and the criminal record were things that were directly related to their addiction. Thefts, frauds, passing bad checks.
Basically people who probably would be great in the industry but can't
get phenomenal in the industry. And they could apply for an exemption, but because of the exemption that you'd get from the state would allow you to work in every field that required a background check. DCF's been loath to grant that to people. So we put in with support, we hope it passes, think it will, that you can get what's called a limited exemption. It says you'll get an exemption, but you can only work in the drug alcohol treatment field. We also created something called, and this was last year too, peer specialists. Peer specialists, we learned in Medicare, Medicaid pays for this, are basically the conduit, the connection between hospitals and treatment and
support
people.
System.
It's absolutely the ancillary support system. And there's other things in the bill too. We fixed the thing saying, hey, it's now a felony if you lie in your license application. It used to be a misdemeanor. And we talked about that. I mean, right. Simple fixes, but things that we need to tighten the reins on. As the task force, and because the task force goes all year and the legislative session ends at the end of April, what we're starting to focus on now, and we just started talking about finally, is the insurance and the medical side. Is what our best practices. What are we going to do? And so and there are people.
So where do you see this all going? I mean, the next year or two.
Okay, where it's going, the next step, I strongly believe are three things. One, more Oxford houses in Florida. Oxford House is probably the original sober living residence, or Oxford House is a nonprofit. I think they're based in Maryland, where they'll give you a charter where people choose to live together in sobriety, and they give you a support system.
Sort of a recognized model for sober living.
Absolutely. And there aren't many in Florida for whatever reason. And so we're working with them to try to encourage them to come into the state and give them some kind of financial support. Because the outcomes, there's been studies done of the outcomes of people who come through Oxford houses, and the sustainability of their sobriety and recovery, it just goes off the charts in a good way, positive way. They get the life skills back, they're working, they become integrated back into society, and they still have that support system of shared peers at home. I think we're going to really, really dial into now ASAM criteria, the American Society for Addiction Medicine, which has criteria for placement, which the state hasn't adopted. I think what we're going to see, we had talked off the record about, is this probably looking like a groundbreaking case called Wicks versus United Healthcare.
I know, I know we didn't get to that, but you and I can sit and talk.
But the key there, that's a big thing. United Healthcare, and most insurance companies we've noticed is that they've been arbitrarily denying drug and alcohol treatment, notwithstanding the law, or saying, well, yeah, your doctor says you need 30 days, we'll give you 2. That violates the Parity Act and other things. But in that, one of the things that came out of that case was certain states, Texas being one of them, had adopted ASAM criteria as the criteria for placement. And so the doctors were meeting ASAM criteria, ASAM, but United Healthcare saying, well, we don't care, we're applying our own guidelines. And the court in the Northern District of California said to United Healthcare, and especially in Florida, one of the largest insurers in the country, your decisions were arbitrary and capricious, and as demonstrated by the plaintiffs, guided solely by financial considerations. How much money do we have to spend on this? So I think that's a pivotal case for that. My guess, which has nothing to do with the task force, is you're going to see, I cannot imagine the number of class action suits that are going to be against them for people that have been injured, who lost loved ones, or didn't get proper treatment, or were abused in bad treatment centers because they couldn't get
the treatment
they needed in the facility they needed. The task force isn't working on, but is keeping an eye on, as you know, in Florida. Florida's a very progressive state when it comes to the Marchman Act and the Baker Act, and they're looking to expand that. Some questions are coming down a little bit because it does deal with civil rights about involuntary commitments without the need for the petition and all that. What do you do? Because if someone's overdosing, aren't they effectively committing suicide or trying to? In these concepts, can you force someone into treatment? Not just hold them. Which is, I am certainly not the expert on. You are.
And we could spend another hour talking about that, too.
Yeah. So these are the things that are coming forward. I think the next big step is going to be really some robust conversations with insurance, who is loath to come to the table.
About whether they're not going to pay it, because obviously, that's another thing. Even when you involuntarily commit somebody, insurance companies will pay for that treatment into that one, but not that one, which is kind of where you might want to send the client, just based on what you know about them. But also, I know from my experience, if someone's been, using for 5, 10, 15 years, 30 days of residential is, I'm not saying it's a waste of time, but I know from the kids that I speak to, they tell me, look, they need a minimum of 90 days, and insurance companies not paying for 90 days.
The 30-day model is becoming like colloquial, as I say. Like, where do we get that from? It's become a norm, but it doesn't mean it's right. If you ask anyone worth their salt in addiction medicine, no one's ever cured, so to speak, but if you look at timelines, it takes 5 years of constant sobriety and working yourself and your program and being supported to where the likelihood of a relapse falls off the table. It could always happen because, one thing that we don't realize is that you can be sober, but life goes on and life stressors come on later on. And how, look, I'm not in recovery. If I have a really bad day, I can go home and have a drink and relax. They can't. These are people who unfortunately cannot rely upon any form of substance or anything except maybe meditation and other kind of non-addictive methods to deal with life stress. And it's a little unfair that's the way it is. The other thing that we're working on is the task force is very concerned that MAT, medication-assisted treatment, Suboxone, the medication used to give people that have addictions to alcohol and or opioids, as a way to taper them off of the craving so you can work on them, that the federal government has really viewed that like methadone, like the cure. It's not a cure, it's medication-assisting treatment. So you have a lot of doctors who are just giving out Suboxone, like, here's your 30-day supply, I'll see you in 30 days. And so we're concerned about
abuse of that too.
Well, certainly abuse and the next pill mill epidemic of that. Because now the federal government is supportive of that. It's viewed as harm reduction. And so that's going to be...
Sounds like kicking the can down the street.
It really is.
A can on the street,
It's showing that there's not an understanding of what addiction medicine is. And sadly, if you want to be jaded about it, it's the same people that, Big Pharma, if you want to go there, say the people that created the problem now just created the cure. And to that point, Purdue Pharma, the Sackler family, it was just through, they're getting sued. And there's now been evidence that's come out that as they saw their drug that they knew would be addictive and they were marketing it, they said, hey, by the way, look, there's an opportunity to go into addiction medicine and addiction care.
We have a cure for the epidemic we caused.
And that just comes down to what I say. I'll leave you with this. The biggest addiction in our country is greed. And I think it's the only addiction that's a national pastime.
Maybe.
Because if it makes money, it's okay, apparently.
Crazy stuff. Listen, I really appreciate you coming in. I mean, I know there's the United Healthcare case, which we really didn't talk about much. I mean, you and I can sit and talk for another 2 hours.
Well, I'll come back again. I mean, we could go.
Really fascinating stuff. Yeah. And also, the insight into the task force. I mean,
task force is wonderful. Actually, one of the questions was other areas or other states. We met with the Orange County DA's office from California, and what can we do? And overwhelmingly was create a similar task force. Find subject matter experts in your area, put them around a table. Not a bunch of yes men and women, but people who will debate the topics and find the best outcome for that community. But at this point, Dave's testified before Congress, the House Ways and Means Committee. I think that what we're doing down here with the task force is going to be replicated as one of the many ways.
I think it's going to have to be.
It does. It's sad, that there's not that other states, other cities, other areas don't know what to do. And again, in the internet age, you say, well, look, just go. What are they doing? Let's replicate that. And that, for some reason, that's not happening. I don't know why. I don't know if it's a lack of local will or just lack of information, or maybe we're just blessed in South Florida to have a lot of highly educated, knowledgeable people in this space. And the reason that is, I think, and I've always said this, is I think because addiction medicine has been in South Florida that long, that if we're going to be the recovery capital, which was meant to be a compliment and not a pejorative, let's be the diamond. Let's be the best in the country, if not the world, where that is the place you go for addiction medicine.
I love it. Yeah. All right, listen, I really appreciate you coming and give out your contact information. So if anybody has questions,
okay, my name is Jeffrey Lynne, spelled the same way as the ELO singer. Different. My office is in Boca Raton.
The first concert I ever went to was an ELO concert. So, oh my God, we're getting old.
Separate joke about that. We're getting really old because now it's called Jeff Lynne's ELO. So someone said to me, "Hey, send me an email, a meme about that." My office is in Boca Raton. We have 3 offices: one in Miami, one in Pompano, and up here in Boca Raton. We're a full-service law firm. So I deal with a lot of zoning, but my side niche is this niche of where I've somehow become
the guy,
and I think it's because, let me leave you with this. It goes back to when I was kind of blackballed from society. Is I had this moment. I spoke to my wife about this. Is I could have walked away and said, "Wow, this is going to hurt my career. I don't want to deal with this. Let me just focus on my zoning." Or I have an opportunity to affect change for positive. I know what's going on. I see what's going on. Others in the community who are change agents see we're all working together on this. So it's the same thing with black voting rights in the 60s. You can say, I don't want to deal with them because it's going to hurt my career, or I can make a positive change forever in this country. And I don't care if no one knows my name. I can die knowing that I made my country, my city, my state that I'm a native of better. I left it better than I found it.
Do you have a website?
bmulaw.com.
Okay.
And also I have another website, soberlawnews.com, where I just put up current affairs. Sometimes I riff and blog a little bit.
I know you put a lot of stuff out there because I get it. It's great stuff.
Yeah, thank you.
What about phone number? How to
561-549-9036.
All right. And they can contact us, drugandalcoholattorneys.com. We're on a bunch of platforms, right? Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Yeah. I think we're tweeting as well.
Let me give you a shout out. I got to tell you, Mark, and we've become professional friends with each other. Your reputation precedes you, and I sincerely mean that. There are very few people to do what you do, and it's necessary. And I don't think enough parents even know that these kind of services exist. And they need to know. They really need to know about what you do and helping kids with the Marchman Act, Baker Act. It's your services are
Thanks,
invaluable,
Jeffrey.
And I mean that sincerely. Yeah.
It's a labor of love.
It is.
It's the reason practice.
Yeah.
So.
It's if you don't have a life of purpose, as a treatment center called Life of Purpose. If you don't have a life of purpose, then you can never make enough money because you're not satisfied.
It took me a long time to figure that out.
Yeah. So. And I think that's what society needs to figure out.
Yeah.
Generally.
So thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Good to see you, my friend.